It smells like burning electronics. Sometimes one man's suffering is many people's entertainment. My name's Kyle. Welcome back to Vanover Customs. Today's video is not planned, and you've probably already read the title and realized that this machine is broken. I was standing over there, had the machine on, but the spindle off, and all of a sudden I heard a really bad sound. So I walked over here and realized it was the lathe motor whining and screaming, and it was actually starting to smell like electronics. I'm going to turn it on so you can get the essence of the badness before we go ahead and dive in. My shop is a disaster. I'm in the middle of another project, which I have a video coming out on, but we got to stop all that. I probably got to clean this up, move the table, possibly slide the lathe out, and hopefully get that motor squared away. So hope you guys enjoy that process. It'll get worse. Before we tear this bad boy apart, just one thing I want to note about this motor before we even take a look at it. So I believe this motor is a 440 volt motor. I'm fairly positive of that because it has a transformer to operate this motor. At the time when I got this, I didn't know that my shop had 440, and it does. So I don't know what we're going to do, but we may just throw a 440 motor in there and eliminate that transformer. We may or may not have to rewire it. I really don't want to go down this path, but if we're going to go down the path, we might go down the path as far as we need to. I use this machine all the time, so this is a big deal for our shop. My Lion lathe will be the breadwinner once it's up and running, but until that, I'm over here at least 2 days a week. I do have the blue lathe, but even you see I have a project right now that is just better suited in this machine. So this really is kind of an emergency repair for us. That doesn't mean I want to take any shortcuts, but time is definitely going to limit what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to off camera get this all cleaned up. I do fear that we're going to have to slide the lathe out. It's already leveled and all that, so it'll be a whole ordeal. I'll go ahead and clean up all the chips, clean up the table, maybe move the table back off camera, and I'll kind of bring you back once we have to move this lathe, because I'm sure it'll be a little interesting, and see where we're at. I think the motor has been rebuilt once before, or rewound, because if my memory serves me correct, I think there was a re-stamp on the motor plate, but we'll know when we take it out. So let's go ahead and cut to the next scene where everything's clean and out of the way. We got this area all cleaned up so we can get the lathe away from the wall, but the good news is I think we're going to have enough room to do it in place. It's going to save a lot of time and effort of re-leveling the lathe, moving the bench, all that kind of stuff. So that's some great news. So we'll get this pan removed and we'll get right under there where the motor is and hopefully get that baby extracted. We got this bad boy out. It actually wasn't too bad, only took a couple hours. The main thing is just the weight, getting that thing handled around. Luckily, we had the sky hook that we made in a previous video, and that really came in big time for lifting it out of that area and up onto the table along with the jib crane. Not too bad, it's about 300 and something pounds, but more than I'd be wanting to lift myself. Taking a look at the bearings, they sound terrible, but hopefully we caught it early enough where we didn't have any spun bearings on a shaft, but we'll know more once we dive in. I'm gonna go ahead and power wash this off camera. Normally you don't want to power wash equipment, but we are taking this apart and it is a sealed unit. I'm just trying to get most of the grime off so that way disassembly is a little bit more enjoyable. And then once it's apart, we'll make sure everything is dry and clean. So let me get this power washed and cleaned up off camera, and then I'll bring you back so we can start taking this guy apart. Now that we got the motor washed, you can see the tag more clearly, and my memory was correct. This is 440 volts, and I do believe this motor has been rewound. Now, someone can correct me if they know better in the comments, but I'm guessing this original tag is original to the motor, and because it's been restamped, it had been worked on probably by a motor shop and relabeled. There's also only 3 leads coming out of it. Usually when it's a dual voltage, it'll have 9, so you can wire it either way, but we won't know more until we get into the actual motor itself. I think that's 1150 RPM, however, it could be 1750. I probably could figure it out based on the amp draw, so I might do a little bit of research, but yeah, that's the tag. Now that the motor's out, hopefully you can hear this bearing grinding noise a little better. We got this fully disassembled, and man, this motor is looking really rough. Now the bearings aren't actually the worst I've ever seen, but they're not great, but this motor is super, super dirty. And I thought this was a closed frame motor, and I was mistaken. It actually is an open frame motor, but it's a little bit better of a design than what's on the K&T, where it's open around the front. It's actually only open on the bottom, which is a better design because most of the contamination comes from the top. But I'm sure this motor probably was original, and when it failed, they had it rewound or rebuilt. And so this motor has taken 10, 20, 30, 40 years of dust from the ground, from the bottom, chips and grime, and packed it all inside this motor. I think it's pretty bad of the motors that I've taken apart. But if you work at a motor shop, I'm sure you see something like this every day. Now, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get this fully cleaned up. The rotor I'm not concerned about, the stator, but the actual rotor in here, it's a little bit more delicate and it's packed. So I haven't decided fully what I'm going to do. Probably we'll try to clean this, and if it cleans up in a reasonable amount of time with no damage to the wires, we'll try to get this cleaned up, replace the bearings, and go from there. If that is not going to work, we will have to find a new motor. Now, luckily, I do have a brand new Vanover motor sitting on the shelf literally 4 feet above me. It's 15 horsepower, 1725 RPM, and 440 volt. So that motor would work really nicely. It is a little bit faster than this 1150 RPM, if that's what that is. But that actually could be good because it might give us some additional speeds. But I need to do some research just to verify that is not a 1750 motor. But I've been saving that motor for the shaper restoration. And so those motors are about $5 or $6 grand brand new. And it is brand new, and I only paid 250 bucks for it at an auction. So if we have to use it, we will. But if we can get this cleaned up, then that would be ideal. Not only because this is a 10 horsepower and that's a 15, and I don't know if I'm going to need to do any rewiring to get it to work, but then I can save it for its intended project, which is the shaper. So I'm going to get a lot of this cleaned up off camera. It's pretty disgusting. It's pretty monotonous. But I'll bring you back once we get some of it cleaned or once we decide how we want to proceed if we're going to source a new motor. Well, through the magic of film, everything is done and you guys don't get to see any of it. I'm soaked, I'm dirty, and I'm happy. I'm happy to report that I think this motor is going to be salvageable. I know it looked really ugly in the last scene and I wasn't very hopeful, but luckily it actually cleaned up not too bad. Probably got, I don't know, 3 hours into it. And really the pressure washer did great work. When you're cleaning these wires, they're coated with like a lacquer, so we really don't want to use solvent. But the water was able to get in there, and because it's pressurized and because it's hot, I have a hot water source over there, we're able to blast all that stuff out. There was no wire damage. Very, very happy with that. And it looks really nice as well, nice and clean. Cleaned up the end caps. These are just some extra caps. And then the stator as well. Went ahead and just tested the leads to make sure that the electronics were good. I'm not going to go into that. It's really easy. All you do is just ohm between each of the wires. And it was like 1.5, 1.5, and 1.6. And then we ohmed to ground and on each of them, and it was super high resistance, meaning there is no short. So I'm really hoping that this motor is going to be good, and I think it will be, which is why we got to this point. We ordered some new bearings from McMaster Car, and it was $80 delivered basically in a day. So big win there. So overall, I think we're going to get the new bearings. We'll reassemble this bad boy. We will throw a coat of paint on it just because, since we got it out and all cleaned up. And I think this motor is going to run better than it ever has, at least in the last 20 years. All right, guys, we got the motor in, we got it wired up and bolted back down. It was really pretty straightforward, and now we're ready for the moment of truth. I haven't fired it up yet. You're gonna be seeing it and hearing it for the first time just like me, so let's get to it. It's quiet. It's weird. Well, I would call that a success. The machine's on. I can barely hear it. I did go ahead and adjust the clutch off camera a little bit because it was making a little bit of a rattling noise. I can't get it perfect because the machine has a little bit of wear in the clutch, but the motor is silent. I don't hear anything really other than the sound of bearings going. I'm super, super impressed. It's crazy how you can pull something apart like that and put it back together and replace the bearings and make such a big difference. So I'm really glad we can get this machine back up and running and start making some parts again. If you guys enjoyed the video, let me know down below and we'll see you in the next one.